Hello everybody, welcome back. This is Freya. This is Freya. I'm Jason.
Hi.
That was my wife Amy, if you could hear her yelling hi. We're bringing you today's video. And as always guys, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. We've got a bunch of videos coming out. We try and give as much information as we can, as much new research that we read about, things along those lines, but mostly just information about autism. And today I want to talk about the differences between autism and ADHD, because there's a high comorbidity rate between autism and ADHD. They can present a lot of similar symptoms and similar reactions, so there's quite a bit of overlap between the two. Now, as I was looking at my notes, a lot of this stuff deals with children, but I'm going to try and add a little bit more into it as far as adults go. So here we go with some of the signs that you may see. Now, first off, I want to talk about just, what are they? What are they? What is ADHD? ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition, issue. It's not a spectrum like autism, but it is still considered neurodivergent versus neurotypical, and it makes it hard to concentrate, to pay attention, and to control your impulses, especially the concentration and the paying attention. And it can present wildly different ways. Now, the inattention is very, very key, very critical. It can definitely affect day-to-day life. And we talked a little bit more about that on the video on ADHD. The hyperactivity side of things, the thing is, people hear ADHD and they just think bouncing off the walls like a ferret on crack, but ADHD people may also show very calm moments as well, too calm moments sometimes. Does not mean the brain isn't going up a million miles an hour, but again, the way it presents itself, it can present itself in wildly different ways in a very short span of time, depending on environmental conditions and tasks and just what's going on, versus autism. Now, autism is a wide range of neurodevelopmental issues. Autism is a spectrum, and it's a very broad spectrum because there are literally hundreds of things that can be signs and symptoms of autism, and no two autistic people are alike. It is the fastest growing developmental and learning disability in the United States, and that does not mean that it is more prevalent now than it used to be. A lot of people that don't understand autism and don't know a lot about it believe that there are things that are making children be more likely to be born autistic now than, say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 100 years ago, and that is absolutely not true. What has gotten better is our ability to diagnose it. We are more able to see it, more able to understand it, maybe not understand, but diagnose it, at least be aware of it. We're getting more understanding of how broad this spectrum is and how many different ways it can present. Again, no two autistics are alike. Even if they have a lot of similar symptoms, they will present differently, they will deal with them differently, and they will mask differently. And autism can affect social skills, learning, day-to-day living. It can create a lot of challenges, especially socially. Plus, thinking, the brain just works differently. ADHD, the brain also works differently than most neurotypical people, but in ADHD, it's almost that the brain works too fast or too many parallel processes. It's like the brain is trying to hyper-thread itself. Whereas with autism, they have challenges in how they think, they see things differently, they understand things differently, and that can cause a lot of issues, again, challenges socially, learning, language, just again, development. Repetitive behaviors are also very, very common with autism, which is also why OCD is another condition that is comorbid with autism fairly often. So some of the signs, and again, these are mostly focused on children, But some of the signs, one of the signs of ADHD would be forgetfulness. Easily distracted or daydreamy is what you'll see with children. Now with adults, you will see this forgetfulness in more day-to-day types of activities. Losing your keys all the time, forgetting your work badge or your work keys or your work shoes. I did that on a trip once. Forgot my shoes and my belt, but I remembered all the rest of my work uniform. So as soon as I got there, I had to go to the mall and buy a belt and shoes because I forgot those two things for some unknown reason. The funny thing is, they were actually stacked on top of my suitcase. I moved them to grab the suitcase when I left. I can't tell you why, but I did. I have no clue or concept of why I did that. Also on another trip, I packed the wrong shoes. I packed the black suit and I packed the shoes that went with the gray suit, I believe it was, the brown suit. So again, forgetfulness. As an adult, it can show up in a lot of ways. Forgetting those simple things, forgetting things that are very specific to a task you were doing, such as the construction worker that put their drill down a minute ago and doesn't remember where. That kind of forgetfulness. Forgetting to set appointments, forgetting to make appointments, setting appointments, forgetting to set, say, reminders. Forgetting about deadlines that were set for work tasks, things along those lines. So, for children, you see a lot of daydreamy stuff. You see a lot of not paying attention and distraction. For adults, you see a lot of forgetfulness. The whole absent-minded professor thing kind of shows up with adults that have ADHD. On the autism side of things, one of the big things that we've talked about many times, a lot of difficulty making and maintaining eye contact. They're absolutely incredibly uncomfortable for a lot of autistic people. For ADHD people, you'll see another one of the signs is appearing not to listen and difficulty following directions. And that appearing not to listen for an adult appears to be distracted, doesn't seem like they are listening, seems like they are paying attention to something else. That's because they are. They're not trying to. They're trying to listen. They definitely want to listen, and yet you're thinking about 3 different things that you have to get done tomorrow, and also wondering if you turn the stove off, and along with that, since you're thinking about the stove, what should you make for dinner tonight, and what ingredients do you have? So you better think about going to the grocery store, but which grocery store do you want to go to, because there's 3 of them, and you've been thinking about checking out that new grocery store that opened up last month. Meanwhile, there's an actual conversation happening to you, but you're thinking about all these different things, plus wondering what you're going to watch on TV tomorrow night. And you just appear utterly distracted and just don't seem to be listening at all. One of the ways for an adult that shows up a lot is forgetting people's names. Forgetting people's names literally seconds after they told you their name. You heard it. You know you heard it. And when you try and remember, you remember sound, but you cannot remember what they said at all. Very common. Now, following directions, also a difficult one for ADHD people for a lot of the same reasons. Either they didn't hear all the directions, or they heard it but it didn't sink in, or they just heard noise because, again, they were thinking of other things. Then, even if they did hear all the directions, once they get to actually doing all those directions, again, you're thinking of so many different things, and you're trying to move so quick that you tend to skip things. Now, one of the autism signs that may show up for children is delayed speech. However, there is something called speech delay syndrome or delayed speech syndrome. We have another video talking about the differences between the two. Just because a child shows a delay in speech from what you may read or see in videos as the normal age-appropriate levels of their speech capabilities does not mean that they are autistic or that they are presenting any autistic signs. It could just be speech delay syndrome or delayed speech syndrome. Either one is not a be-all, end-all point either. Some autistic children may not begin speaking for 1 to 2 years after what would be considered normal for neurotypical children, and yet within a year of them starting to speak, their language has progressed 2 or 3 years past their age-appropriate levels. So there is no be all and end all, like, oh my God, they're behind on this, they're going to be behind forever. That's not true for either condition, the delayed speech syndrome or autism spectrum disorder. So, again, there needs to be intervention, therapy, speech therapy, things along those lines, but it can be overcome. It can be overcome fairly common. Now, a lot of ADHD children especially are prone to tantrums. They're prone to tantrums, they're prone to meltdowns, typically due to a frustration or lack of impulse control, whereas autistic children will frequently show meltdowns that are more related to an inability to understand or deal with their emotional situation at the time. So an ADHD kid may throw a tantrum, may have a meltdown because they're frustrated and they want to do something and they're not being allowed to, or they want to do something and they get in trouble for it, or there's something they want to do and something is preventing them from doing it, such as they want to be outside playing and they're in class and the teacher won't let them. Whereas with an autistic child, if they're experiencing a meltdown, it is likely coming from an inability to deal with their emotional situation. Now, sometimes that can come from frustration, especially if they have delayed speech and they're trying to communicate something and the person they're communicating to is just not understanding, and that makes them frustrated because the autistic child has difficulty difficulty processing and dealing with those emotions. So that frustration emotion can then lead to anger, and which can lead to a meltdown. But an autistic child can also end up having what could appear to be a meltdown from happiness even, because they can't deal with that emotion either. And unfortunately, if it's not fully understood, it can lead to a lot of difficulties for a child, especially with a neurotypical parent that does not understand the autism and autistic side of it, because in instances of, let's say, misbehavior, his autistic children still thrive on routine and actually need routine. So being taught what is expected, what is not expected, what is right, what is wrong, and having set expectations and consequences is extraordinarily important. But when those consequences are put in place, especially early on, it can definitely lead to meltdowns, not because of the consequence, but because of the strong emotion that is there along with it. You have a child, let's say a very young child, and you ground them from something, their favorite thing, their favorite TV show, their favorite tablet, something along those lines, because they did something that they know they are not supposed to do, and you punish them and they go into full meltdown mode. In the neurotypical parent that just doesn't understand thinks the child is continuing to misbehave and punishes them more, which then causes more of a strong emotion that they again can't deal with. They already can't deal with the emotions, and we make it worse. The meltdown continues and can escalate to violent behavior from children during these meltdowns. They cannot deal with the emotions. They have a lot of difficulty dealing with it. That is on the autistic side of things. One interesting thing, and definitely one of the big differences between the two, ADHD, they often struggle with organization. They have a lot of difficulty with organization. Of course, difficulty with completing tasks, but a lot of difficulty with organization. Whereas autistics have a tendency to overorganize and can be very rigid in their thinking, very rigid in their processes, and very, very, very much need routine. Absolutely need routine. That's one of the big differences between ADHD and autism. One side needs and thrives on routine, while the other side is utterly disorganized and absolute chaotic mess. Now, ADHD people do struggle with social skills, while autistic people also struggle socially, but they struggle in different ways. ADHD people struggle with their social skills mostly when it comes to the hyperactivity side of things, their tendency to butt into conversations, tendency to talk over people, incessant talking, answered questions before the question's even finished, sometimes before the question's even asked, or on the other side, the inattentiveness, forgetting the person's name that you're talking to, forgetting what they were talking about. it can happen. It can happen. Forgetting what you were talking about mid-conversation, it certainly can happen. So those things can cause difficulty with social communication, whereas on the autistic side, they have difficulty with social cues. And autistic people, especially because of that difficulty with eye contact or inability with eye contact whatsoever, they also have difficulty recognizing facial expressions, recognizing body language, recognizing idioms, and any kind of speech that is not absolutely blunt, direct, and to the point, which very little speech for neurotypical people is blunt, direct, and to the point. Very, very, very little of it. So difficulty with understanding the speech, the facial cues, body language, all those things, difficulty understanding the back and forth conversation. So all the small social cues are what the autistic people do not understand and have difficulty with, whereas the ADHD person does understand those things and can recognize them if they can slow themselves down enough to see them. Or if they're in the inattentive, forgetful, calmer side of the ADHD, the balance, I suppose, at that moment, because again, ADHD people will be on both sides all the time, or at different times. That forgetfulness and that inattentiveness will cause social difficulty. So they both will present with social difficulty, but they present them differently and for different reasons. ADHD people will struggle to sit still during quiet times, quiet activities, or just sedentary activities, even sitting down to eat a meal, sitting down to watch a movie, sitting down for just about anything. Autistic people can at times seem that way, but a lot of times it's because they're not interested in something. If they're interested, if an autistic person, especially a child, is interested in a subject, they will hyper-focus and they won't move for hours for just doing what they do. You know, you put a documentary on their favorite subject up on the TV, and the autistic child is glued for an hour. ADHD, unlikely, and a lot harder for them to sit still, a lot harder for them to stay in their seat. So along with that, as I'm saying, autistic people have a tendency to hyperfocus and show extreme interest in something to an obsessive level. For children, it can get pretty interesting, actually. I saw a 5-year-old that didn't start speaking until right before they turned 5, that got utterly fascinated with the solar system and could tell you every planet and their name, and the order they are in the solar system, every dwarf planet and their name, and most of the moons. That's pretty darn impressive for a 5-year-old, especially one that barely even started speaking 4 months prior to that. And how do they learn those things? From books and from TV shows. They read it themselves or watched it on a TV show. That's the kind of obsessive interest and focus that autistic people can have. And it can be in anything, and adults have the same things. They may have learned to mask it better. Oftentimes, when it comes to things like this, oftentimes that masking is something they learned because of mockery from other people. From children are brutal. So, you know, in high school, you know, the outcast nerds in high school that were mocked by everybody as they grow into adulthood, they hide it. They don't go on their 20-minute excited discussion or lecture on Pokemon cards or on comic books or on science fiction movies or on their rock collection or the plants that they find so fascinating, whatever it may be, whatever subject they got utterly obsessively interested in and know so much about, they've learned not to go on these huge rants, unless they were lucky enough that one of their interests, because autistic people will have multiple interests like that. Unless they were lucky enough that one of their interests happened to be something that is more socially acceptable, such as, you know, you've got that autistic kid that can tell you who played what position for every year's baseball team for the Yankees. Every year who was first base, 1972 Yankees kind of stuff. that at least they're lucky enough they have one of those interests that some segment of the population will find more socially acceptable. Um, Autistic people may seem like they're fidgeting and fiddling with things a lot. That usually is a sign of just boredom with the subject that they are currently being forced to learn. So it shows up a lot with children. Shows up a lot with children, especially in school. It doesn't show quite as much with adults because either they've learned to mask it, or more often than not, what we are doing is at least something we chose to do. Even if it's work and we're not a big fan of the work, we chose to go to work. We chose to go work at that place. We chose to apply to that job. So tend to be a little bit less fidgety, whereas children definitely didn't choose to be going to school for 12, 13 years. So they didn't choose to be doing social studies this hour when they're really fascinated with science and they want to hurry up and get to their science class. So, that fidgety side of things, that on-the-go sort of mentality of things, on the autistic side, it usually comes more from boredom. Whereas on the ADHD side, there's a lot of fidgeting. But that mostly comes from the distraction and the need to be moving and the need to be doing something. So they can present very similarly, but have very, very different reasons. ADHD people have a lot of trouble waiting in line. They have a lot of trouble waiting and being patient. Whereas an autistic person, if they understand the reasoning why, because autistics can be very, very pedantic to rules, if they understand the reasoning why, or told something is a rule, like, everybody must wait their turn, must wait in line, they are more than happy to do so. Because that's the rule. That's the rule. It's what people are supposed to do. They take things at face value. Autistic people tend to take things very, very much at face value. I've already mentioned this, but a lot of ADHD people have a tendency to interrupt. Also, they have a tendency to act with that very impulsively. Do something without thinking about it, without thinking about the consequences, without thinking about what they're supposed to do, what they're not supposed to do. This can cause a lot of difficulty when it co-presents with autism. When you have an autistic child that has difficulty with their impulse control and acts impulsively with no thought to the consequences, even though they do understand the consequences, they do know there are consequences. Then when the consequences come up, it can lead to autistic meltdowns because they can't deal with the emotions. So it can be difficult. That when those two co-present together, it can be very, very, very difficult. ADHD people may overreact to some sensory situations. Doesn't happen very often. It's not a huge sign of ADHD, but it certainly can happen. ADHD people also have a big tendency for very rough play, especially children, very rough play, and tend to be risk takers. As adults, you tend to see that with more rougher sports and risk-taking, adrenaline junkie type of people. Again, that kind of on the go, and the adrenaline certainly kicks off the endorphins in the brain. Whereas with autism, autistic children often just simply have no understanding of safety and danger. They don't have an awareness of safety and danger. Rather sad, but a fact about autism. Autism, it's not a disease. It doesn't get worse over time. It's not something that you can catch. It's not something that is degenerative. Somebody is autistic or they're not. If they are autistic, they're going to remain autistic. They may learn how to mask it, but they're going to remain autistic. But one thing that autism does not do, autism has absolutely zero effect on lifespan. Has no effect on potential lifespan, I should say. However, autistic people are twice as likely to drown. I'm just using drowning as an example, but this is true. Autistic people are twice as likely to die of drowning than neurotypical people. This, again, comes from the lack of danger awareness, lack of safety, and lack of awareness of dangerous situations or danger. Even if, say, a child, and oftentimes that death rate occurs in childhood. So a child may learn to swim, and they don't understand that, say they're at the beach, they don't understand that if they swim out until they are tired, they still have to swim back, but they're tired. They just don't have that danger awareness. They just don't understand it. Whereas an ADHD person does understand that they may swim out until they are slightly tired to have that thrill, but they'll understand when they should be turning around and going back, whereas the autistic person may not. They may not have that danger awareness. Autistic people also have difficulty showing understanding of people's emotions, and again, that deals with the whole lack of empathy thing, and that mostly deals with being able to read and understand people's facial expressions, body language, how they're speaking, things they're saying, social cues. Again, now one common thing with autistics is very, very strong, almost to meltdown level reactions to sensory things. Now, typically, for most autistics, if they have sensory issues, it's generally one is at least the prime. Even if they have multiple sensory things, usually one is the primary that is, I guess you could almost say the worst, whereas others may be a little bit lesser. So for some autistic, it might be sound. Either certain volumes, certain frequencies, certain types of sounds will just set them off. If you want an example of that, watch The Accountant. It's a great movie, Ben Affleck, but they really show, at one point, trying to learn to deal with actual multiple sensory things at once. Extreme loud sounds along with physical pain, things along those lines. But typically, strong reactions to different things: smells, tastes, touch, sensory, tactile sensations, how some things look. Now, autistics usually have some minor sensitivity, within all of them. But again, there's usually one that is bigger than others. Could be something with taste or even texture. Even texture of foods or things along those lines, or textures of fabrics and clothing, colors. Again, volume, how loud things are, or certain frequencies or certain types of noises. Say you might have an autistic that just cannot deal with the sound of crickets or something. That, again, so many different things. So there you guys go. That is some of the symptoms of both ADHD and autism, and some of the differences between them, especially ones that seem to present the same. So I hope you guys find this interesting, helpful, illuminating, enlightening. Thank you everybody for watching, and please hit the like and subscribe buttons. We'll catch you next time. Bye now.